Late one Thursday evening, Pastor David was alone in his church office finishing notes for Sunday's sermon when the phone rang. It was nearly 9 o'clock. Most calls at that hour were simple enough: a prayer request, a hospital emergency, a family needing comfort after bad news. He answered without hesitation, but within seconds, the color drained from his face. The voice on the other end spoke calmly, almost matter-of-factly, yet every word struck harder than the last. By the time the call ended, David sat frozen in silence, staring at the wall as a single question echoed through his mind. Was it possible that the woman he had loved for more than 20 years had been hiding a life he knew nothing about? For most people in town, Sarah was impossible to dislike. She organized food drives, visited nursing homes, taught Bible studies, and seemed to know exactly what to say whenever someone was hurting. Parents trusted her. Church members admired her. Neighbors described her as kind, dependable, and devoted to her faith. If someone had suggested that Sarah was keeping a dangerous secret, they would have laughed at the idea. Yet within days of that phone call, investigators would begin uncovering information that challenged everything people believed about her. Old records would emerge. Long-forgotten questions would return. And a chain of events stretching back years would suddenly take on an entirely different meaning. What began as a single anonymous tip soon grew into something far larger than anyone expected. The deeper people looked, the more difficult it became to separate truth from appearance. Friends began questioning memories they once trusted. Church leaders found themselves searching for answers. And Pastor David faced a possibility almost too painful to accept: that the person he thought he knew better than anyone might have been hiding the most important parts of her life all along. Stay with us until the end, because the final discovery shocked investigators, divided an entire congregation, and left one family struggling to understand how such a secret could remain hidden for so long. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The call ended, but the questions it raised refused to disappear. For the next several days, Pastor David replayed every word in his mind, searching for some explanation that would make sense of what he had heard. Yet the more he thought about it, the more impossible it seemed. Sarah was the woman who remembered birthdays, delivered meals to struggling families, and spent countless hours helping people through some of the darkest moments of their lives. She had built a reputation that seemed beyond question. Even when rumors began quietly circulating through the community, most people dismissed them immediately. They assumed someone was spreading gossip. They assumed there had been a misunderstanding. They assumed Sarah would eventually be proven innocent of whatever accusations had been made against her. What nobody realized was that investigators had already begun following a trail that pointed somewhere entirely unexpected. The first signs appeared in places most people would never think to look. Financial records showed transactions that raised concerns. Small amounts at first, scattered across different dates and accounts. Individually, none of them seemed particularly alarming. Together, however, they formed a pattern that investigators could not ignore. As they dug deeper, another detail surfaced. Sarah had been receiving phone calls late at night from numbers that were never saved in her contacts. The calls often lasted only a few minutes before ending abruptly. Sometimes they arrived after midnight, sometimes just before dawn. When investigators attempted to trace the numbers, many led nowhere obvious, creating even more questions than answers. Who was calling her? Why were the conversations taking place at such unusual hours? And why had nobody around her ever noticed anything unusual before? Then came the discovery that changed the entire direction of the investigation. Records revealed the existence of a storage unit located nearly 40 miles from town. The account was not listed under Sarah's commonly used information, which explained why it had remained unnoticed for so long. Detectives immediately became interested. According to payment records, the unit had been maintained for years. Month after month, the rent had been paid without interruption. Yet no family member, church leader, or close friend appeared to know it existed. When investigators learned how long the unit had been active, concern quickly turned into urgency. Whatever was inside had been important enough for Sarah to keep hidden for a very long time. As word of the investigation slowly spread, tension began growing throughout the community. Church members who had once defended Sarah without hesitation found themselves wrestling with uncomfortable doubts. Others refused to believe any of it. Some insisted investigators were making assumptions based on incomplete information. Others wondered whether they had overlooked warning signs for years. Pastor David remained caught between those two worlds. Part of him wanted to dismiss every accusation and protect the woman he loved. Another part feared that the answers investigators were uncovering might be impossible to explain away. And as detectives prepared to open the storage unit and examine its contents, one thing became painfully clear. Whatever they were about to find had the potential to change everything people thought they knew about Sarah. What detectives found inside that storage unit would become the first crack in Sarah's carefully built world. But to understand why, we have to go back to the beginning. Long before investigators uncovered the storage unit, before the anonymous phone call, and before questions began spreading through the congregation, Pastor David and Sarah appeared to be the kind of couple most communities admire. David had spent nearly his entire adult life serving others. Raised in a modest household where faith was treated as a daily commitment rather than a Sunday obligation, he developed a reputation for honesty and hard work at an early age. After graduating from seminary, he accepted a position at a small church in a quiet American town where everyone seemed to know one another. He wasn't flashy or charismatic in the way television preachers often are. Instead, people trusted him because he was consistent. When someone needed help repairing a roof, David showed up. When families faced medical emergencies, David visited hospitals. When tragedy struck, he sat with grieving relatives long after everyone else had gone home. Over time, his dedication earned the respect of nearly everyone who knew him. Sarah entered his life shortly after he began his ministry. She was intelligent, warm, and remarkably easy to talk to. Friends remembered how naturally she connected with people. Whether speaking with church elders, young parents, or complete strangers, she possessed an ability to make people feel heard. Their relationship developed quickly. Those who knew them during those early years often described their connection as genuine and effortless. Within a short time, they married and began building a life together. As David's responsibilities within the church grew, Sarah became an equally recognizable presence in the community. She organized outreach programs, coordinated charity events, and volunteered for nearly every major church initiative. Congregation members often joked that if something positive was happening in town, Sarah was probably involved in making it happen. Together they built more than a ministry. They built a reputation. As years passed, the church expanded. New families joined the congregation. Community projects flourished. David and Sarah raised their children while balancing the constant demands of church life. To outsiders, their marriage appeared strong. They supported one another publicly and privately. During church events, they seemed perfectly in sync. During community gatherings, they appeared genuinely happy. New couples frequently sought their advice. Older members praised their commitment. More than one church member later described them using nearly identical words. They called them the perfect couple, the example everyone looked up to, the marriage they wished they had. Yet, as investigators would eventually discover, appearances can conceal details that only become significant in hindsight. Looking back, several people remembered small incidents that seemed unimportant at the time. Sarah occasionally disappeared for hours without offering much explanation. The absences were never dramatic enough to raise alarms. She always had a reasonable answer when someone asked where she had been. A family obligation, an errand, a meeting. Most people accepted those explanations without hesitation. There were also moments when conversations unexpectedly stopped as others entered a room. Brief pauses, quick changes of subject. Nothing anyone considered suspicious at the time. Life moved on, and those moments faded from memory almost as quickly as they occurred. Financial matters created another subtle concern. Church bookkeeping occasionally revealed minor discrepancies that required clarification. The differences were usually small enough to be explained away through simple accounting errors or delayed paperwork. Whenever questions arose, answers followed. Nothing appeared serious. Nothing appeared urgent. Most importantly, nobody wanted to believe there could be a problem involving someone as trusted as Sarah. The idea seemed unreasonable. The community had spent years seeing her as a source of guidance and support. Questioning her character felt almost unimaginable. Then one church member noticed something unusual. It wasn't a missing sum of money. It wasn't a suspicious phone call. It wasn't even connected to the storage unit investigators would later discover. It was a detail so small that almost everyone else overlooked it completely. In fact, had this person decided to ignore what they saw, the questions surrounding Sarah might never have begun at all. The church member who first noticed something unusual wasn't searching for a scandal. In fact, he almost kept the observation to himself. During a routine planning meeting for an upcoming community fundraiser, he watched Sarah excuse herself from the room. At first, nothing seemed strange about it. Church volunteers stepped out of meetings all the time. What caught his attention was what happened afterward. Nearly 40 minutes passed before Sarah returned. When someone casually asked where she had been, she offered a vague explanation about handling an urgent personal matter. The answer satisfied most people in the room, but not everyone. Similar moments had happened before. Small interruptions, unexpected departures, explanations that seemed complete on the surface, yet somehow left questions behind. Individually, they meant very little. Together, they formed a pattern that became increasingly difficult to ignore. Around the same period, Sarah's late-night phone calls continued. Nobody knew exactly who was calling her or why the conversations always seemed to occur outside normal hours. Friends occasionally noticed her stepping outside gatherings to answer calls privately. Family members recalled moments when her phone would ring and she would immediately leave the room before responding. Whenever questions arose, she explained that she was helping people through personal crises or handling sensitive church matters. Given her role in the community, the explanations seemed reasonable. Most accepted them without hesitation. Yet as time passed, concerns quietly grew among those closest to her. Some believed Sarah was carrying more responsibility than anyone realized. Others wondered whether family problems or personal stress might explain her increasingly distracted behavior. A few suspected financial difficulties. Some whispered about the possibility of an affair. Nobody possessed evidence. Nobody knew the truth. But uncertainty had begun replacing certainty. Then another problem emerged. Church financial reports showed minor discrepancies involving charitable donations. At first, the amounts were so small that few people paid attention. A bookkeeping error seemed far more likely than misconduct. Administrators corrected records and moved forward. Yet similar discrepancies continued appearing. Gradually, the amounts increased. Money allocated for outreach programs seemed slightly lower than expected. Certain deposits appeared delayed. Documentation occasionally failed to match account balances. None of the differences alone proved wrongdoing, but together they created enough concern for church leaders to begin asking questions. The answers they received offered temporary reassurance, yet they never completely resolved the inconsistencies. As weeks passed, concern quietly transformed into suspicion. Eventually, church leadership decided to conduct a discreet review of internal records. Their goal wasn't to accuse anyone. They hoped to identify clerical mistakes and eliminate uncertainty before rumors spread. During that review, someone suggested examining security footage from areas where donation records were stored. Nobody expected the recordings to reveal anything significant. Yet when church leaders sat down to watch the footage, they immediately noticed something they could not explain. Sarah appeared entering administrative areas at times when she had no documented reason to be there. In some cases, she remained inside for extended periods. In others, she arrived late at night after most staff members had already gone home. The footage didn't reveal what she was doing. It simply raised questions that nobody could answer. The discovery marked a turning point. Church leadership launched a quiet internal review while trying to avoid public attention. Financial inconsistencies continued growing. Additional records required examination. Conversations became increasingly uncomfortable. Sarah, who had once seemed confident and approachable, appeared noticeably different. Friends observed changes in her behavior. She seemed tense during meetings. Questions that once would have received immediate answers were now met with brief responses or visible frustration. Some described her as defensive. Others believed she was simply overwhelmed. Regardless of the explanation, people noticed the difference. So did Pastor David. For David, the situation created an impossible conflict. His instinct was to defend his wife. He had spent more than 2 decades building a life alongside her. He knew her better than anyone, or at least he believed he did. Yet every new discovery made blind trust more difficult. As concerns multiplied, he found himself caught between loyalty to Sarah and responsibility to the church he served. Congregation members looked to him for leadership. Church leaders expected cooperation. Friends sought reassurance. Meanwhile, David struggled privately with doubts he never imagined facing. The possibility that Sarah might be hiding something weighed heavily on him, even as he searched for reasons to believe there was an innocent explanation. Then investigators uncovered information that dramatically expanded the scope of their concerns. Financial reviews identified accounts church leaders had never seen before. Correspondence surfaced involving individuals unfamiliar to anyone in Sarah's immediate circle. Records pointed to debts that had never been disclosed. The discoveries explained some of the unusual financial activity, but they failed to answer the most important question. Why had Sarah worked so hard to conceal these things in the first place? The deeper investigators looked, the more fragmented the picture became. Each answer generated two new questions. Each lead pointed towards something larger that remained hidden, just beyond reach. Then came the discovery that changed everything. During a broader review of financial and property records, investigators located documentation connected to a storage unit nearly 40 miles outside town. More surprising than the unit itself was the name attached to the rental agreement. It wasn't Sarah's name, at least not the name everyone knew her by. And as detectives prepared to find out what had been hidden there for years, it became clear that the mystery surrounding the pastor's wife was far from over. In many ways, it was only beginning. By the time church leaders completed their initial review, concern had turned into urgency. The security footage raised questions nobody could comfortably answer. On multiple occasions, Sarah appeared entering administrative offices after regular hours, sometimes remaining inside long after everyone else had left the building. The recordings showed no obvious crime. They revealed no dramatic confrontation and no clear explanation. What they did reveal was opportunity. Opportunity to access financial records. Opportunity to review donation reports. Opportunity to enter areas normally restricted to authorized staff. When church leaders compared the footage with attendance logs and office schedules, the inconsistencies became difficult to dismiss. Sarah had been present in places she rarely needed to be, at times when nobody expected her there. At the same time, financial concerns continued expanding. What initially appeared to be minor bookkeeping discrepancies now stretched across multiple accounts and several years of records. Investigators discovered transactions that lacked supporting documentation. Certain donations appeared to move between accounts before reaching their intended destination. Small withdrawals occurred so infrequently that they escaped attention for long periods. Yet, viewed collectively, the pattern suggested deliberate activity rather than accidental mistakes. Church leadership faced a difficult decision. Publicly addressing the issue could damage the congregation and destroy reputations if the concerns proved unfounded. Ignoring the evidence, however, carried risks of its own. They ultimately chose a middle path, launching a quiet internal review while limiting knowledge of the investigation to a small group of trusted individuals. As scrutiny increased, several people noticed changes in Sarah's behavior. Once known for her confidence and warmth, she now appeared distracted during conversations. Meetings she previously led with ease seemed to make her uncomfortable. Questions about finances, schedules, or administrative matters occasionally triggered reactions that surprised longtime colleagues. Some described her responses as defensive. Others believed she simply seemed exhausted. Friends who attempted to check on her received polite but distant answers. The woman who had always appeared available to help others was suddenly becoming harder to reach. Those closest to her struggled to understand what was happening. They knew something had changed. They just couldn't determine why. No one felt that conflict more deeply than Pastor David. Every new concern forced him into an increasingly painful position. For more than 20 years, Sarah had been his partner in every meaningful part of life. Together they had built a family, a ministry, and a reputation founded on trust. The idea that she could intentionally deceive him seemed impossible. Yet the evidence accumulating around him refused to disappear. Church leaders quietly sought his cooperation. Congregation members unknowingly looked to him for reassurance. Meanwhile, David wrestled privately with questions he never imagined asking. Was Sarah hiding something? Had there been warning signs he failed to recognize? Or was the investigation leading everyone toward the wrong conclusion? The more he searched for certainty, the more elusive it became. Then investigators uncovered information that dramatically widened the scope of their inquiry. Financial records revealed accounts previously unknown to church leadership. Some contained transactions linked to individuals who had no obvious connection to the congregation. Correspondence recovered during the review suggested ongoing communication with people Sarah had never mentioned to friends, family, or colleagues. There were references to obligations, deadlines, and payments that seemed unrelated to church activities. Most troubling of all were documents indicating significant debts that had never been disclosed. For years, Sarah had maintained the appearance of stability while apparently managing financial pressures nobody around her knew existed. Yet despite the growing pile of evidence, the central mystery remained unsolved. Secret accounts explained hidden financial activity. Correspondence explained some of the late-night calls. Debts provided possible motives for concealment. But none of those discoveries answered the larger question that investigators kept returning to. Why had Sarah gone to such extraordinary lengths to keep parts of her life hidden? What was important enough to justify years of secrecy? Every lead pointed towards something larger, something investigators still had not uncovered. Then they found it. While tracing financial records connected to one of the undisclosed accounts, investigators located payments linked to a storage facility nearly 40 miles outside town. The monthly charges had continued for years without interruption. At first, the discovery seemed merely unusual. Then detectives examined the rental agreement itself. The unit had not been leased under the name Sarah used every day. It was connected to a different name entirely, one that immediately raised new questions about her past and her identity. As detectives secured access to the unit and prepared to examine its contents, they realized they might finally be standing at the edge of the secret Sarah had spent years protecting. And what waited behind that locked door would change the entire investigation. The storage facility sat on the outskirts of a neighboring county, far enough away that most people from Pastor David's town would never have reason to visit it. The location alone raised questions. Investigators had already confirmed that monthly payments for the unit stretched back several years, yet no one in Sarah's family, church, or social circle appeared to know it existed. On a gray morning, detectives arrived with documentation authorizing access. They walked through rows of identical metal doors until they reached the unit connected to the alternate name discovered during their investigation. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the lock clicked open. What waited inside was nothing like what investigators expected. The unit wasn't filled with expensive possessions, stolen property, or obvious evidence of criminal activity. Instead, shelves and storage boxes lined the walls in an organized arrangement that suggested someone had visited regularly and carefully maintained its contents. Detectives began opening containers one by one. Inside were folders containing financial records dating back years. There were photographs of people no one immediately recognized, correspondence organized by date, identification documents connected to multiple names, bank statements linked to accounts previously unknown to investigators. Every item seemed to point toward a life that existed separately from the one Sarah presented to the community every day. As detectives continued cataloging evidence, a timeline slowly began emerging. The materials stretched far beyond recent events. Some records reached back more than a decade. Others suggested connections extending even further into the past. Certain photographs showed Sarah in locations she had never mentioned visiting. Several documents appeared connected to addresses where she had never officially lived. Investigators found records indicating relationships, financial obligations, and personal associations that had never surfaced during interviews. The deeper they examined the contents, the more difficult it became to reconcile the evidence with the woman church members thought they knew. News of the discovery spread quickly despite efforts to keep details confidential. Rumors traveled through the congregation, then across the town. People who had spent years trusting Sarah struggled to process what they were hearing. Some refused to believe the reports. They insisted there had to be an innocent explanation hidden somewhere within the investigation. Others felt betrayed. They replayed conversations and memories, wondering whether clues had been present all along. Questions surfaced at local businesses, family dinner tables, and church gatherings. The same uncertainty echoed everywhere. If Sarah had hidden an entire storage unit filled with records from her past, what else had she concealed? For Pastor David, the discovery marked the beginning of a personal crisis unlike anything he had ever experienced. Investigators shared only limited details with him initially, but even those details were enough to shake his confidence. Every new document seemed to challenge another piece of the life he believed they had built together. Memories that once felt secure now appeared uncertain. Conversations he had forgotten suddenly returned to him. Unexplained absences, late-night phone calls, financial concerns. Small details he once dismissed now seemed impossible to ignore. For years he had trusted Sarah completely. Now he found himself questioning whether he had ever truly understood the person standing beside him. As detectives analyzed the material recovered from the storage unit, one discovery stood out above all the others. The documents did not describe a secret maintained by a single individual acting in isolation. Multiple records referenced meetings, financial transfers, and communications involving other people. Names appeared repeatedly throughout the files. Some belonged to individuals investigators had already encountered during the case. Others were entirely unfamiliar. Patterns emerged connecting separate pieces of evidence that previously seemed unrelated. The conclusion became increasingly difficult to avoid. The storage unit had revealed far more than hidden accounts and undisclosed records. It revealed a network. And according to the evidence now sitting on investigators' desks, Sarah had not been keeping her secret alone. Once investigators finished cataloging the contents of the storage unit, the case entered an entirely new phase. Until that point, many of the discoveries had raised questions without providing complete answers. Now detectives had something far more valuable, a roadmap. Every document, photograph, receipt, and communication recovered from the unit became part of a larger effort to reconstruct the hidden life Sarah had worked so carefully to conceal. Teams began comparing financial records with phone logs. Correspondence was matched against travel records. Names appearing in one document were cross-referenced with names appearing elsewhere. Slowly, a picture began taking shape, though it was far more complicated than anyone expected. Financial investigators focused first on the money trail. Records recovered from the storage unit pointed toward multiple accounts that had never appeared during earlier reviews. Some transactions connected directly to the unexplained discrepancies found within church records. Others appeared entirely unrelated to church finances. Money moved between accounts in patterns that initially seemed random but eventually revealed consistency. Payments occurred on specific dates. Transfers appeared linked to individuals whose names surfaced repeatedly throughout the recovered documents. Investigators spent weeks tracing those connections, attempting to determine who benefited from the transactions and why they had remained hidden for so long. Meanwhile, another team concentrated on communications. The late-night phone calls that once seemed mysterious now carried greater significance. Call histories matched names and numbers discovered inside the storage unit. Email records revealed conversations stretching back years. Messages referenced meetings, financial obligations, and personal matters never disclosed to family or church leaders. Some exchanges appeared harmless when viewed independently. Others suggested relationships that Sarah had deliberately concealed. Investigators assembled timelines showing how communications overlapped with financial activity, gradually revealing connections that had remained invisible for years. The deeper detectives looked, the more frequently they encountered references to private meetings. Hotel receipts, travel confirmations, handwritten notes, and calendar entries suggested a series of encounters that took place far from the town where Sarah and Pastor David lived. Witnesses remembered seeing unfamiliar individuals speaking with Sarah during conferences and community events. Some meetings lasted only minutes. Others stretched for hours. None of them appeared significant at the time. Together, however, they formed another piece of the puzzle investigators were trying to solve. As details leaked to the public, speculation exploded. Media outlets picked up the story, transforming a local investigation into a topic of regional interest. Headlines focused on the mystery surrounding the pastor's wife. Reporters interviewed residents. Online discussions multiplied. The town quickly divided into opposing camps. One group believed Sarah had betrayed the trust placed in her and deserved whatever consequences followed. Another group insisted investigators were building assumptions rather than proving wrongdoing. Many people remained undecided, waiting for evidence that would finally explain what was really happening. Several individuals emerged as possible suspects or accomplices as investigators followed new leads. One was a former business associate whose name appeared repeatedly in financial documents. Another was connected to several unexplained transactions. A third individual had exchanged dozens of messages with Sarah during periods that coincided with her unexplained absences. Each discovery generated fresh theories. Each theory captured public attention before eventually running into contradictions. Time after time, detectives pursued promising leads only to discover they explained part of the mystery rather than all of it. The case became increasingly complex, filled with dead ends, partial truths, and unanswered questions. Throughout the investigation, interviews revealed just how divided the community had become. Some church members spoke passionately in Sarah's defense. They described years of generosity, compassion, and service. They struggled to reconcile those memories with the allegations dominating local conversation. Others felt betrayed and angry. They argued that trust had been abused and demanded accountability regardless of Sarah's reputation. Families found themselves debating the case around dinner tables. Lifelong friendships became strained by disagreements. The investigation had evolved beyond a search for facts. It had become a test of loyalties throughout the community. Then, just as investigators began wondering whether they would ever fully understand the network revealed inside the storage unit, someone unexpected came forward. The individual had remained silent for years. According to investigators, this witness possessed knowledge reaching back to the earliest stages of Sarah's secret life. For reasons known only to them, they had never spoken publicly, never contacted authorities, never shared what they knew. Until now, when detectives finally sat down to hear their account, several pieces of the puzzle immediately fell into place. Details investigators had struggled to explain suddenly made sense. Long-standing questions found answers. Hidden connections became clear. By the end of the interview, one thing was certain. The testimony of this witness would change the direction of the entire case. The witness had spent years carrying information that could have changed everything much sooner. According to investigators, fear was the reason for the silence. Fear of being dragged into controversy. Fear of damaging lives. Fear of exposing secrets that powerful emotions had worked hard to bury. Yet after seeing the investigation unfold, and watching the community struggle to understand what had happened, the witness finally decided it was time to speak. During a lengthy interview with detectives, they provided details that immediately connected pieces of the puzzle that had remained disconnected for months. The hidden accounts, the late-night phone calls, the secret meetings, the alternate name attached to the storage unit. For the first time, investigators could see how all the pieces fit together. According to the testimony, Sarah had been living a second life for far longer than anyone imagined. Not for months, not for years, for decades. Long before she met Pastor David. Long before she became a respected church leader. Long before she earned the trust of an entire community. The witness described a chapter of Sarah's past that almost no one knew existed. It was a chapter she had spent years trying to erase. Certain relationships, financial obligations, and personal decisions had followed her into adulthood despite every effort to leave them behind. Over time, what began as attempts to keep painful memories hidden evolved into something much larger. One secret required another. One concealed fact demanded additional concealment. As years passed, maintaining the image everyone expected became increasingly difficult. The storage unit became a repository for documents she could not destroy but could not allow others to find. The hidden accounts provided a way to manage obligations she never wanted exposed. The unexplained phone calls connected her to people from a life she believed she had left behind but could never fully escape. Suddenly, everything investigators had uncovered began making sense. The financial inconsistencies were no longer isolated mysteries. The correspondence recovered from the storage unit fit neatly into a timeline stretching back decades. The alternate identity connected directly to events from Sarah's past. The late-night conversations reflected ongoing attempts to manage circumstances she feared would eventually become public. Investigators concluded that much of her behavior had been driven by a combination of fear, shame, and desperation to protect secrets she believed would destroy the life she had built with Pastor David and the church community. As evidence mounted, formal proceedings followed. The courtroom quickly became the center of attention. Reporters filled seats. Community members gathered early to secure places inside. Some arrived hoping for accountability. Others arrived hoping Sarah would somehow be vindicated. Day after day, evidence was presented. Financial records were displayed. Witness testimony was examined. Investigators described the discoveries made inside the storage unit. Attorneys argued over motives, intent, and responsibility. The community listened as years of hidden actions were placed under public scrutiny. Throughout much of the proceedings, Pastor David remained quiet. Observers frequently described him sitting motionless as testimony unfolded around him. Friends later said the silence reflected a man attempting to process the collapse of everything he thought he understood. Every revelation forced him to reevaluate memories stretching across decades. Moments that once seemed ordinary now carried entirely different meanings. Explanations he had accepted without question suddenly appeared incomplete. The woman he loved was still sitting in the courtroom, yet the story emerging through testimony felt like the story of someone he barely knew. Eventually, the proceedings reached their conclusion. The court delivered its decision. For many observers, the outcome represented justice. Evidence had been examined. Facts had been presented. Consequences followed. Some members of the community felt a sense of closure at last. Others remained heartbroken by the destruction left behind. Families continued debating the case. Church members struggled to reconcile compassion with accountability. Yet despite the verdict and despite the appearance of resolution, investigators remained troubled by one lingering detail. Because hidden among the final pieces of evidence was something suggesting the story was not over. And what emerged next would force everyone to question whether they had truly uncovered the whole truth about Sarah's secret life. For weeks after the verdict, most people believed the story had finally reached its conclusion. The investigation was over. The evidence had been presented. The court had spoken. News coverage gradually faded. Community discussions became less frequent. Life, at least on the surface, seemed ready to return to normal. Yet investigators continued organizing records collected during the case, reviewing documents one final time before closing the file completely. It was during that process that they discovered something unexpected among materials recovered from the storage unit. Tucked inside a sealed envelope was a handwritten letter addressed to no one in particular. It had never been mailed. It had never been shown to family members. And according to investigators, it appeared to have been written by Sarah herself. The contents immediately captured attention. Unlike the financial records, hidden correspondence, and legal documents that had dominated the investigation, this letter contained something far more personal. Sarah described years spent carrying secrets she believed would destroy everything she valued. She wrote about fear becoming a constant companion, fear of exposure, fear of rejection, fear of losing the family and community she loved. She acknowledged decisions she regretted and choices she wished she could undo. Yet perhaps the most surprising part of the letter was what it did not contain. It offered no attempt to excuse her actions, no effort to blame others, no attempt to rewrite the facts investigators had uncovered. Instead, it revealed the perspective of someone who had spent years trapped between two versions of herself: the woman she once was and the woman she desperately wanted everyone to believe she had become. For many people, the letter complicated the story rather than simplifying it. Some viewed it as evidence of genuine remorse. Others believed it arrived far too late to matter. The community once again found itself divided, though this time the debate felt less focused on guilt and innocence and more focused on understanding. Was Sarah simply a dishonest person who successfully deceived those around her? Or was she someone who made serious mistakes and spent years trying to outrun them? Could both things be true at the same time? The questions lingered long after the investigation ended. Perhaps that is why this story continues to resonate. It forces us to confront uncomfortable realities about trust, perception, and human nature. How well do we truly know the people closest to us? How much of another person's life remains hidden, even within the strongest relationships? Can trust survive deception once the truth finally emerges? And when someone has done both admirable and harmful things, how should they ultimately be remembered? Months later, the church stood much as it always had. The building remained. The congregation continued gathering. New families joined while longtime members slowly adjusted to a future that looked different from the one they once imagined. Yet traces of the past remained impossible to erase. One evening, after most members had gone home, Pastor David sat alone inside the sanctuary. The same pews. The same stained glass windows. The same quiet room where he had spent years preaching about faith, forgiveness, and truth. Now there was only silence. The investigation had provided answers, but not necessarily peace. Some questions had been resolved. Others would never be answered completely. Outside, the town continued moving forward as towns always do. Businesses opened each morning. Families gathered for dinner. Children grew older. Life carried on. But nobody forgot Sarah. And nobody forgot the secret that changed everything. Some people who followed this case from the beginning remain convinced that Sarah carefully constructed a false image and spent years protecting it. They point to the hidden accounts, the unexplained meetings, the alternate identity, and the evidence recovered from the storage unit. In their view, the deception lasted far too long to be explained away by fear alone. Trust was broken, lives were affected, and accountability was inevitable. Others see the story differently. They believe Sarah became trapped inside a web of secrets she no longer knew how to escape. They argue that every attempt to protect her past only created another burden to carry. What began as silence eventually became deception. What began as fear eventually became a life divided between truth and concealment. By the time everything surfaced, the consequences had become impossible to avoid. So what do you think? Did Sarah deserve forgiveness? Could her actions ever be understood, even if they could not be justified? Or was justice the only outcome that made sense after everything investigators uncovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every comment, and we'd love to hear where you stand on this story. And if you thought this investigation was shocking, wait until you hear what happened in our next case. A story involving a trusted community leader, a missing fortune, and a discovery nobody saw coming. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more real-life mysteries, hidden secrets, and unforgettable investigations, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a future episode. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.